do it, but that's it. All right. A little bit about my bio that I don't think I shared at the beginning of the year because frankly, that's kind of boring when teachers are like talking about all their resume stuff. 3 years ago, when we were getting ready to open up, I had a chance to go out to Harvard. They flew me out to Harvard out in Massachusetts and spent a week working with some professors and people at Harvard talking about education and how to do education really well. Specifically, what I was there for on the little certificate thing over there is for teaching classes about religion and religious literacy. So I spent a week there doing that. Since then, I've had the opportunity to work with Harvard on a couple other things. And most recently, I'm working on something that they're doing called the case study method, where they're using stories of things that have happened throughout history to be a platform for teaching about history or about government. Instead of going like, government can be really boring sometimes if your class is like, all right, well, here's, the president serves for 4 years and then they this and that. There's 100 members in the Senate and blah, blah, blah. It can be really boring. I always think it's like terrible when that happens because there's so much interesting stuff to it. These people had a very similar mind frame. And so what they're doing is they're using stories as a framework for how to teach and talk about stuff in government and stuff in history. So we are going to test out one of their things today as we kind of wrap up stuff from Black History Month and get into our next possible unit of where we're heading. We're going to look at one kind of sample of one of these lessons that they do. We're not necessarily going to start working on the whole thing because we have this weird short week thing going on, but we're going to check it out and see like, what do we think about it? How do we like it? Is it something that's interesting? Is it something that's worth doing a little bit more of throughout the semester? They're asking us to possibly try and do 2 of these like full through. So we're thinking about, is that something that we're interested in? Would that be something that works for us? So we're going to check it out. It's 2 pages of reading, just like we kind of always do. So very similar in that way. The story kind of goes more like a story and less like we're like reading a book like it is when we're doing our other reading. So that's a little bit helpful, I think. And then another thing that's different, we're on Perusal, which by the way, shout out Harvard. That's another Harvard program. We are on Perusal, but I'm not for this one requiring that we got to have like 10 annotations as an assignment. There is an assignment that goes with this. We'll get to that at the end, but I'm not requiring annotations. That said, if you want to use them because you have a question about something, you have something that you want to talk about, you have something that you notice, go for it. They're always still there. If you have a question about stuff and you throw it in the annotations, it'll never get missed because it's there. Somebody will respond to it somehow. There were some people in third hour, last hour, who had some really good conversations in the annotations about the stuff that was in the reading as we were doing it. So that option's always there for you. What we're reading about today, as we're wrapping up, again, some of our Black History Month stuff, is about Martin Luther King and some stuff that he was involved in. Specifically, this reading is a bigger thing if you've looked at it in the library and not in the assignment. In the assignment, you only see the first 3 pages. In the library, it's like 30 pages. The last 7 of which are all like the sources where they got the information. So it's really only like 20 something, but even still, 20 some pages is like twice as long as the chapters that we've been reading in Compassion and Conviction so far. So it's big. It would be like a real choice if we wanted to dig into that. That being said, I think the reading goes faster and smoother because of like, it's telling a story. If there's stuff in the story you don't get, what's a good place to go? Annotations. Yeah, thanks, Jay. All right. Again, not required that you're doing 10 annotations, but if you want to use it, we know how to use the tool really well. Let's use it really well. If you're willing to read, go ahead and throw that in the chat, and then I'll find you. That'll be a lot easier for me to find you that way. Otherwise, I'll find some. I'm going to read the first paragraph. Jay, you want the second one? The fourth one. All right. I'm going to read the first paragraph, kind of get us into it. If you want to read, thanks, Jay, and a couple other guys for getting in the chat already. I'll find you. And then I'm looking for Jeremy on the fourth one as we finish off this first page. So this whole section, this whole article is called Martin Luther King and the Struggle for Black Voting Rights. This will talk a little bit about that as kind of the introduction that we're looking at today. So on Tuesday, March 9th, 1965, that was 56, if you're bad at math, 56 years ago exactly, next Tuesday. 55 years and 51 weeks ago. Next Tuesday, when you guys are off for the ACT thing, which, hey, go work on the ACT Aspire. Shout out to you guys. That'll be the 56th anniversary of this happening. Mello, make sure you're with us, okay? So only juniors because they're taking the ACT, right? All right. On Tuesday afternoon, weird, it was a Tuesday even. On Tuesday afternoon, March 9th, 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. led more than 2,000 protesters, blacks and whites, men in jackets and ties, women in dresses, on a march from Brown Chapel, an African Methodist Episcopal church. Pause for a second. Why is that kind of like blowing my mind right now? AME, James said. Why, James? Where have we heard about AME churches?
In our lives,
Yeah, in a passage in our last reading, right? When we were reading in Compassion and Conviction, they were talking about that. Why were they talking about AME churches?
Because it's a black church.
Because the other churches was the other churches was kicking the black people out, so they chose to make a black church.
Yeah, totally. And so James was saying like they're making a church that black people could go to. That was in the 1780s. That story we read was from 1787. It is now, in this story, 1965. It's almost 200 years later. And those churches that they started are still around. They are still around today, 56 years later yet. But 200 years later, when they went, like Narvel said, hey, we're done with being treated so poorly in church. We're going to start a church that is for African-American people. They did it, and it lasted. Anyways, back to the story. They are being led on a march from an AME church in Selma, Alabama, to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, spanning the Alabama River, a short distance away. He faced an agonizing decision about whether to defy a federal court order by crossing the bridge. Keeve said, I heard he was very fair and then he fought for all blacks. Yeah, totally. I would agree with that. It was his only, James said it's his only choice if he wanted to get his statement across. Say more about that, James. What do you mean?
But I'd say, if he wanted to say, black people need to be equal. That was the only choice to get the word across, and hear what tell the white people what he was thinking and what he had to say.
Yeah. James was saying, look, that was if he was really about that, he was going to get that word across. That was the only way that it was going to work to really do that well. Javen, are you going to read the next one? All right. Yeah, the 36-year-old.
36-year-old Baptist minister and director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference had recently won the Nobel Prize for his leadership of the civil rights movement in the United States. The movement aimed to outturn state laws and customs requiring racial segregation in the South, as well as state laws and parties that disfranchised black voters here. King had helped launch the movement in 1955 as a spokesman for a boycott against segregated buses in Montgomery, the state of Alabama, and had brought the segregation issues predicted.
Unprecedented. That means like it's never been seen before.
Forget the word.
Unprecedented.
Unprecedented attention with a campaign of mass nonviolent civil disobedience in
Birmingham.
Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. In the summer of 1964, Congress had enacted a sweeping civil rights act.
Oh, pause for 1 second. They have been doing all this marching and protesting and stuff and all this boycotting. And the next summer, they started getting a bunch of laws passed. So it was working. Keep going, Jay.
But wait. But in here it say that some people still didn't follow.
Okay, yeah. So, right. Jazz just said wait. So it says in some, like it says in here, some people were still not following it though. Yeah. So that's the issue, right? It's not working for everything. They haven't got everything changed for voting rights yet, Jazz, but they're on the path. That's what they're working on. When it says disenfranchised, do you guys know what disenfranchised means? Manuel looked it up. What is it, Emmanuel? Yeah, depriving somebody of the right to vote. Do you guys know of any ways that people were deprived of the right to vote? Javen?
Women.
Taking education away, that like by like trying to make sure that your people are a little less educated, maybe less likely to vote. Okay. What are other ways that they like try to stop people from voting? Anybody know?
Women.
Women couldn't vote for a very long time. It's only been 99 years that women have been able to vote. Think about that for a minute. It's kind of crazy. Jay? Yeah, Jay said they also did tests. They did. They called them literacy tests. And so they would have people read stuff, but was it like, can you read like a paragraph of this? No, it was like, can you read this Shakespeare? Now, I don't know about y'all. Maybe you guys have different preferences. I have 2 college degrees. I've read 100 books in the last 2 years. I don't like reading Shakespeare. I don't really enjoy it that much. And so part of it was like on purpose to set people up to go, look, see, you can't read. Because honestly, like raise your hand real quick if you want people who can't read voting. I see no hands in the room. If you're online, do you want people who can't read voting?
Yeah, no.
No.
That is what it says. Why doesn't matter? Just because they can't read, that don't mean they can't vote.
Okay, so you guys are bringing up a great point, right? Sabian and Jazz are going, well, why does it matter?
Because,
Why does it matter, James?
Because, like, in order to vote, like, you need to read, like say, somebody trying to rob you out of, or somebody trying to, I'll say, salute you or something. Like, sign your signature, like, do, like, I'd say, like, voting for the president, like, where somebody trying to, like, make you vote for the president that they want to vote for, but you don't want to vote for him.
Yeah.
That's basically, like,
So-
like, they can't read at
So
all.
yeah, so James had a very, very practical. Hold on, Marcus.
Like this, or you can say,
You trying to start.
president,
Marcus.
or you can say, basically on it, it says, if you select this president, you have to take the vaccine or something, you know you don't wanna take it. And then you can sign it off on
Yeah.
that, and then it's stuff backing up.
So James had a very practical thing. He said, well, if somebody was trying to trick you out of voting for somebody or trick you into something and you can't read, then like it's hard. So that's just a real practical concern. On the next level,
Bro,
but Marcus, if you can't
It's your president that you vote
If
for.
you
That's
can't-
That's they trying to make you do.
if you can't
If you
read,
so you can't like read a name.
Right.
It's not. It's
So
not
if
like
you-
today, like when they put a picture of it and they got the president name under it, it's not like that. It's like the president name. You gotta sign it and then put it in a little. You
Yes.
have to read in order to look at it.
Right or wrong?
right.
He said if you ain't read at all.
Guys, all right. Bring it- bring it-
I will give my life for this president or something like.
Bring it back. Bring it back. It's gentlemen. Let's bring it back. The
But still, am I right?
So, Marcus. Listen. All right. So here's the deal, right? It feels like it's really simple, but you're speaking as somebody who has a lot of privilege because you know how to read. So like for you, it's like, well, it's just the name. Come on. But if you don't know how to read, so that's one level. Another important thing is like, what does it say about you if, all right, we gotta, professionally, can I quiz you for 2 seconds?
Yeah, man, let's do it.
Do you want somebody, just in general, we're not making any like statements about you. Do you want somebody who can't read voting?
I mean, I'd rather than know how to read.
I'd rather, yeah, so that's a very good political answer, right? I'd rather they know how to read, right? It feels bad. It feels bad to say that, but like we make real judgments about somebody based on like if they can read or write. If they can't read, we assume that like they don't know a whole lot. So hold on, Marcus. Just so like whether that's right or wrong, and I think Sabian and Jazz were onto that when I kind of hinted at that before, and they were like, "Well, what's the problem?" But like, yeah,
I'd
it's
say an educated society oftentimes can be safer than an uneducated society because you can learn more about history and not repeat past failures. But I don't know if that's always true for literacy. I don't know.
yeah. I think there's
I want to bring my car, bring my house, bring my kids to dentists, construction guys, office workers, police officers who know how to read. For some reason, it feels like they'd be in better hands, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
And so reason we're talking about that is we're talking about literacy tests for voting and how that used to be a restriction. And people pass that off as like, well, this is a really good thing because we want people, like if people can't read, we don't really want them picking leaders in society, which like sounds nice on paper because there is that feeling of like, I want educated people making decisions. It can also be a weapon that somebody uses to oppress. And so there's two real sides to it.
You could build an elite
Music.
democracy, an upper class of people that then lord their power over people.
Yeah.
That's dangerous. Yeah, I can see that too.
What's up, Marcus?
He's
Okay. So
You're very hung up on this. I'm gonna let you finish. Go ahead.
if they can read, just not pronounce the words correctly,
Yeah.
they should still be able to vote.
Right. And so here's the thing, Marcus.
They can't pronounce the words correctly, but they can still read.
Marcus.
He's saying,
But he's saying if you can't read
if you
at all,
can't read at all.
Right.
I got something to say on
You can't read at all.
Gentlemen,
That's called being
we're
illiterate.
wasting time. Bring it back. So here's the thing. Since then, in the last 56 years, we've made it legal that even if you can't read at all, you can go in and you can vote. So we've changed it. His argument has won. His argument has won nationally because the other side was so easy. What we were just talking about when Festerling was in here, it's so easy to go the other way and make it this really weird thing that people said, you know what? Even if you can't read at all, you can come in and do it. Now, we could argue all day about is that like right or wrong or what's the in-between steps, but that's the reality. Part of that has happened because of what was going on in here. So disenfranchise means taking that away. Another way that they used to take people's voting rights away is by charging a fee. They would say, all right, you can vote, but it's going to cost you $20, which for some people, they go, all right, no problem. But for other people, they go, And now all of a sudden you have a huge group of people who are not voting just because they are charging a fee. Tyree said that's like them reading but not understanding. Yeah. So like there's lots of options, right? For how they disenfranchise people. Jay, you are halfway through this paragraph, maybe a little bit further, or did you finish? I think there's one sentence left. I cut you off. Go ahead, unmute, ask your question, and then finish.
um, largely banning legally enforced segregation, yet suppressing of black voters remained prevent how you say that prevents
Pervasive. Pervasive means like all over.
pervasive across the South, leading King to take the SCLC to Ceylon in January 1965 to start a campaign for voting rights.
What was your question, Jay?
It wasn't really a question, it was just about reading things.
Just on mute.
About the reading thing, I also think that people didn't want people that couldn't read to be able to do it. Also, because like if they couldn't read, then like how would you really know who would you want to really pick?
Totally.
Because so
Right.
like
There's Marcus, guys. So
which
listen,
person?
there's no debate that we need to have, right? There are valid, listen, there's valid arguments on both sides. There's a valid argument to go like, we don't want people who can't read voting because like, it seems like they could be tricked or there could be problems. There's also valid arguments on the other side that go, this is a justice issue. And we're going to treat people justly because a lot of times when people can't read, it's because things have happened with lack of education that are like system problems. And so you could set up, like Feshling was saying, you could very easily set up a real elite society where you gave like certain groups of people money and funding in good schools, and you gave other groups of people no money and no funding in bad schools. And then you also said, oh, by the way, y'all can't vote because y'all can't read because you didn't have a school to go to learn how to read. And we set that up. So like, it kind of becomes this self-fulfilling thing where it never gets fixed because the people who need help can't get it because they can't participate. And so it's a lot of good arguments on both sides. Ultimately, the justice argument that Marcus is making, it won. Jeremy, you're reading the fourth one? All right, I'm going to read the next one, and then we'll get into what's going on next. Make sure you're following along. Stay behind, head up, okay? We are in this last full paragraph on page 1. Central to the campaign was a series of illegal but nonviolent protest marches. As we're reading this paragraph, think about how some of this might sound familiar to you. In February, one of these marches had been broken up by white rioters, local lawmen, including Sheriff Jim Clark, and state troopers, one of whom had shot and killed a marcher, Jimmy Lee Jackson. In response, the SCLC had announced a 3-day protest march from Brown Chapel, their Selma headquarters, to the Alabama State Capitol building in Montgomery, more than 50 miles away down Highway 80. The governor, George Wallace is the governor of Alabama. He is well known. They're going to talk about it in the next sentence. He's well known for being a super hardcore segregationist and racist. When he got elected governor, in his acceptance speech, he said, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. That's what he said in his speech. He's not alive anymore, but that's what he said in his speech. And people like voted for him like crazy. He ran for president. He did not get close really to winning at all, but he did run for president because there were so many people that were like, that appeals to me. Governor George Wallace, who had risen to national fame as an opponent of the civil rights movement. So imagine that. Martin Luther King has gotten famous for the civil rights movement. George Wallace has gotten famous for opposing the civil rights movement. He banned the march, said you can't do it. Not going to march for civil rights in my state. Get out of here. Segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. The leaders of the SCLC decided to defy his order. What's it mean to defy something? Marcus saying going against it. They decided, you know what? We're going to disobey this. They decided to disobey his order expecting that marchers would be arrested at the Pettus Bridge, which connected downtown Selma to the highway. So they figured, we're going to do this anyway. We know like some of these people are going to get arrested most likely. Jazz. Yep.
I'll put a comment up right there, like, it's like they were scared that if black people get their point across, they would actually win.
Yeah.
And then it was like scared that blacks could actually be equal.
Absolutely. Totally true. Right? This guy was leading a whole campaign, a whole political career based on like harnessing people's fears and getting them. And this is why, like, this is the other side of that argument, Marcus, that like, if you can trick people who don't know a whole lot into thinking something is right, whether it's about whether they can read or not, because these people that George Wallace was tricking, they all could read just fine. And they still got tricked into thinking like, well, what if black people start voting? It could be a terrible thing for white society. Like, get out of here, man. That's bogus. You can kick rocks, but it's really easy to prey on people's fears and get them to fall for that. All right, Wingo, come sit up here so people can hear you online. Hustle.
March 7th, 1965, a Sunday, 600 well-dressed marchers left the chapel in orderly lines. King had followed events from Atlanta, Georgia, where he was preached to his home church. When marching across the bridge, they found their way blocked by Sheriff Clark, his men, and state troops. A troop orderly the protectors to
How you say that?
disperse. When they did not,
they said, "Hey, y'all go home. Get out of here."
when they did not immediately do so, the troopers and lawmen advanced. Suddenly, they charged, assaulting the marchers with clubs,
Cattle prods.
and tear gas, and then chased those who retreated through the neighborhood around Brown Chapel, beating any black person they encountered. Many white onlooking cheers. Wow.
Many white onlookers cheered. I'm with Jeremy. He goes, "Wow!" As he's walking away, he said, "I didn't even want to read that." Super valid, right? At the beginning of this, we said, "Are there any things in there that you went like, this sounded kind of similar to something I've heard of before?" Anybody? There were, not in Milwaukee so much, but there were some times where if you watch the news last summer, some of these protests in Milwaukee, it didn't get too bad, but in some places, when the police came out to tell people to go home, it went a lot like this. Police came out, they said, "Hey, y'all go home." Protesters said, "Nah, we're not ready to go home." And then what happened? Rubber, Cam was in the back going, rubber bullets, tear gas. They brought the paintball guns out. They brought the tanks out. There was sometimes in some situations, not in every situation, but in some responses, you had like, the guys with the riot shields and the paintballs and the rubber bullets and the tanks and the tear gas. Yeah, not a good situation, right? Not a good situation. And so 60 years later, 56 years later, some things are better. Some things are very similar, right? So they got to the bridge. They said, "You know what? We're not going to listen to George Wallace. We're going to march. This is serious." They get there. When they don't just leave and go home, the police chase them down. They start smashing people. And there's a crowd of people watching this, many of whom Yeah, just cheering it on. Crazy. That's like the state of our world. Now, one thing that was different, I guess, now is that like that wasn't happening at least. Jazz said, I wonder if it was the other way around, where blacks treated whites how they treated us, and I think that's why this is where so much hate now, because now people are learning about these things now and how people were treated. Yeah. I think it's a lot of it, right? When people learn some of this history, we read in Compassion and Conviction that we just finished, awareness, right? Step 1 in racial reconciliation. When people learn what's going on, they go, whoa, that's kind of messed up. And that's exactly what kind of happens here. They had seen all these people get beat on the news, and they went, uh-oh, what's next? Next little paragraph. Let's see. Nick, you want to read that one for us?
What paragraph is it? You hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I said, what paragraph is it?
We're at television cameras. It's the first full paragraph on page 2.
Television cameras have recorded everything. That evening, all 3 national networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, broadcast the footage. CBS's special report on the events in Alabama interrupted the television premiere of the Oscar-nominated film Judgment at, what does that say?
Nuremberg.
Nuremberg, an all-star drama about the Allied Army trails of Germany judges who had enforced race-based laws against Jews during the Holocaust.
All right, a little bit of irony there. Thanks, Nick. That they were showing a movie, they're premiering a movie on TV that had like been in theaters, but it was premiering on TV, Judgment at Nuremberg. It was all about the Holocaust and how Germans and the Nazis in World War II had discriminated against Jews based on their race. A little bit of irony that they broke into that, where we're like watching a movie about, oh, these guys are awful, they're the bad guys, look at what they're doing, to show like there's some bad guys right here, and like those bad guys are us. Like, it's not just the Nazis doing this, we're doing, and we're like, no, we're not gassing people in gas chambers, but like we're beating innocent people on nightly news. A little bit of irony there. Next paragraph, by midnight, King. So this is on the news all over. You want to read? Can you come here so we can hear? Why needs to be so the mic can hear you? All right, you just stand right there. Yeah, that's fine.
By midnight, King had sent telegrams all over the country announcing that he would personally lead another march from Selma on Tuesday, asking clergy of all faiths to join him.
Clergy
Clergy.
is just, yeah, no worries. Clergy is just pastors. Go ahead.
The next day, Monday, an estimated 800 activists, many of them clergy and
divinity students. Divinity students are people who are in college trying to be pastors, like the STEM guys that we have come in.
And divinity students, both black and white, rushed to Selma by car, bus, and plane from as far as Massachusetts and California. Sympathy marches were held across the country. In Washington, D.C., students occupied their corridor,
the hallway.
Corridor outside the offices of U.S. Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach, demanding federal intervention, TV cameras failed him, and shirt sleeves on one knee, pleading with them unsuccessfully to leave. Meanwhile, SCLC lawyers, it's a
Petition.
petition,
That means they ask, like a lawyer coming to ask you.
yeah, like negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
Petition Alabama federal district judge Frank Johnson, who was seen as sympathetic to the civil rights movement, for an injunction to prevent state and local authorities from stopping the next march.
Okay, so they went to a judge and they say, hey, we want to like make it so that a judge comes in and says, you can't tell these people they can't march. When they see all these people getting beat on the news, Marcus, make sure you're head up and with us, okay? Mello, same thing, man. When they see all these people getting beat on the news, King puts the word in the street. He says, hey, I'm personally gonna lead the next one, and we're gonna go back after they see all these people get beat on TV. And people are coming from all over the country. Everybody ever seen John Wick?
Yeah.
Okay, when those movies are cold, right? When they put the hit out on somebody, what happens?
They was getting
And-
he was on
And when you say they, like who comes? It's like folks coming from everywhere, right? They're so this is like John Wick is like the bad version of it. MLK is doing like the good version of it, right? He puts the word out in the street that like we need to get this taken care of. And there's pastors, there's clergy, there's seminary students coming from all over the country, black, white, whatever, going, you know what? They saw this on the news and they went, this is sus. We got to do something about it. And they pulled up. So that's going on. They're trying to talk to the judges. They got all kinds of stuff happening to see. We gotta do this march again. We gotta finish this. Because it's not okay to watch all these innocent people get beat in the street. Okay. Judge Johnson. So what does he do? They said, hey, can you make it so that it's safe for us to march the next time? Judge Johnson refused to issue an injunction without a hearing. That's fair. He wants to say like we should have a court case, which was scheduled for Thursday, but that's a problem because when do they want to march? They want to march Tuesday. It is Monday right now. And on Monday, he says, would y'all wait till Thursday? And instructed the SCLC to postpone the march. Also, President Lyndon Johnson let King know through intermediaries. That's when you say like a friend of a friend, that he did not want them to march. So the president didn't come and say, y'all can't do it. But he sent people to say that. So like they couldn't come back and say, well, the president told us not to and be all over the news. He just has some people in the background say it. The president who had, and that makes the president sound a little sketchy, but we got to know the context. The president who had shepherded the Civil Rights Act through Congress and was now drafting a voting rights bill, feared that a new march might provoke more violence, which could threaten the prospects of voting rights legislation. So he'd actually been doing a ton for laws for civil rights. And he went, he's the president. He's got to worry about this. He's like, I don't want people getting beat. I don't want any more violence here. Like, I want to get these laws passed. I don't want to get people hurt though, which like, in a way, kind of fair. King did not want to alienate the president, a critical ally, but King's advisors told him that feelings were now running so high among his supporters in Selma that they might defy him if he tried to cancel or postpone the march. King decided to proceed with the march as planned. So they said, like, look, you can listen to the president if you want, but people are so fired up, that if you say we're not marching, they might say, nah, bro, we're marching, and they might go without you. So like, you got to be careful. What's up, James? What?
Oh, I know. But let's say if Martin, like, if he listened to like the judge, like the word got out that the judge would have let them like protest on Thursday, like would he get fired? And another thing is, if the president sent people to do that, wouldn't that still mean like the president?
Yeah. So yeah, James, that's a great question. Doesn't the president saying something through like kind of intermediaries and through like somebody else, isn't that kind of the same? Kind of the same, but it's not quite the same headline, right? If I'm the president and I tell Jazz, and Jazz goes to tell James, and then James goes to tell Martin Luther King, well, like now Martin Luther King can't say, oh, the president told me. He would have to say, James told me. Who heard from, and that doesn't make a good headline. They're just worried about getting dragged in the newspaper or on TV at that point.
And if the president was on Martin Luther King style, wouldn't that be like he going against his own organization because everybody
Technically, they don't like King.
Kind of, yeah. There's a real complicated history there. All right, next paragraph. Let's see. Daquan, you here? All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to read this one for us?
Which one?
On Monday night.
All right. I gotta zoom in because I'm on a what you call it.
Yeah, I got you.
On Monday night, he spoke to the rally at Brown Chapel, celebrating the clergy who had just arrived in town and urging everyone to be brave the next day. Later, at Selma supported where he was staying, he received a midnight phone call from Attorney General. What's her name? Katazine Batch.
Yep.
What is it?
Katzenbach,
who urged him not to King, argued with Katzenbach, finally telling him, but Mr. Attorney General, you have not been black in America for 300 years. After the call, however, King and his advisors engaged in a long, inconclusive debate over to what to do. King had slept only a few hours when he was awakened at dawn by the news that two of the president's Johnson men were at the front door. One was the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, John Doerr. The other one, who had been flown in overnight on the president's orders by military plane from Washington, was former Florida Governor Leroy Collins, who had appointed the director of the new community relations service created to mediate racial conflicts. Kings, still in pajamas, meet with them at the dinner room table.
All right, so the president tries to get a hold of him. Carmelo Marcus, heads up, guys. The president tries to get a hold of him. They say, no, we're still going to go. The attorney general, the top lawyer in America, calls him in the middle of the night, says, hey, we really don't want you to march. Would you wait? What's he say, Cam? No, we're marching. He says, stop telling me to wait. You haven't been a black man in America for 300 years. We're not waiting. The next morning, who's there? Bright and early, the top civil rights lawyer for the government, and somebody that they had like specifically to help sort out some of these conflicts. They came in to say, hey, would you please not go? They informed him that Judge Johnson had issued an injunction against the march. So a federal judge came to say, y'all can't do it. King had previously defied the injunctions of state and local judges, but never a federal judge. That's from like the national level. Collins suggested that King might not violate the terms of the injunction if he led marchers to the bridge, but then instead of crossing it, turned them around, led them back to the chapel. He said, like, you might not be breaking the law if you go out and do that. He said he would ask Clark, as well as the commander of the state troopers, Al Lingo, to agree to this plan. King gave him permission to try. Hours later, King at the chapel had still not heard from Collins, and only his advisors as yet knew about the turnaround possibility. So he tells like his closest people, but he hasn't told anybody else. King told the crowd, put on their walking shoes, and started them toward the bridge. There, as before, the troopers and lawmen waited. According to at least one report, marchers began singing a freedom song. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. The TV cameras were rolling. King now had to decide whether to try to turn the march around at the bridge or to push forward as his fellow marchers were expecting. Now, guys, in this last sentence, I annotated the question that is the assignment for today. The question is, imagine you were marching beside King on March 9th, and he privately tells you, hey, Jeremy, I just want you to know, man, the president sent guys to my house last night. They gave us this option. I'm thinking about when we get up on the bridge, we get up there, we show that we're serious, but then like we turn around and we go home. He asks for your advice. He tells you about the turnaround option, and he asks for your advice about what to do. What would you have recommended and why? Everybody right now, go to Perusal. We're going to take 5 minutes or so. Everybody respond to that question. Jeremy, you can write it on paper there, since you're just on paper. Everybody go respond to that question at the very end of the assignment. Imagine that you have been marching beside King on March 9th, and he privately told you about the turnaround option. So there's like 2,000 people there. Nobody really knows about this. He says, hey, I ain't gonna sleep last night. I'm wrestling with this. Like, what do you think? Like, let me run this by you. He asked for your advice about what to do. What would you recommend and why? Take 5 minutes right now. Get your response. Okay, if you're still working on getting your answer written, get your answer written. If you're working on that survey, pause on that survey. We're going to circle back to this question and spend a couple minutes talking about what is going on, what you think. If you were there on the bridge, you and King together, everybody else is there, 2,000 people waiting, nobody really kind of knows what's up. He says, hey, here's this option that I'm thinking about. What do you think? What are you going to tell them and why? Jess.
I said, I want to keep going.
Just Jess said, I'm going to say keep going, because if you let somebody kind of control everything that you're going to do, they think you're just going to go along without a fight. Manuel? Okay. Yeah, Manuel said, I would say go. We want to get our point across regardless of the consequences. We're ready. Mello? Okay, do me a favor. Yeah, okay. James. Okay. James said, look, it might be worth dying for. So be it. Javen. Yeah. Javen said, I would say turn around. There's more at stake than just you, Dr. King. There's a lot going on. Could also like it could go really bad. Okay. Some online guys. Keith said, King asked for my advice. He said if it would help, yes, but if it gets us nowhere, then cross the bridge. Okay. Montreal had an interesting thing. He said, honestly, I wouldn't give him advice. I'd tell him to keep his word. If he wanted to help us all and guide us to freedom. But then again, at the end of the story, we all got our peace and freedom. Kind of okay. So like, you know, it's easy knowing kind of like where it all lands eventually. Other thoughts. Let's see. Melvin said, if you ask me, I would say let's keep going. But if it gets out of hand, we leave and go home. Yeah, okay. That's fair. I get that, right? Like there's a lot of people. Malachi said I would recommend that we keep on going. Because if we would have turned back, nothing would change. We would have stood for nothing. Okay. I think there's really strong, solid arguments to be made on both sides for like why to do what. But it's a lot to think about with what is going on. All right, 2 things to be working on right now if you are already done with that. Number 1, I want you to go to Classroom. James, you good, man? All right, number 1, I want you to go to Classroom and make sure that you have responded to both of these surveys. Number 1, the teacher survey. I'm trying to learn about how can I do better and what's going well right now. And Harvard wants to know a little bit about who are we, who are y'all, what do you know, what are your experiences with things like this? Be working on that for our last 5 minutes. Also, as we're, American government or government, and then the section number is 4, the hour, 4th hour. 4th period. They're going to ask some questions about your experiences with things like this. And then on the second page, they're going to ask you some like government questions. Some of them we've talked about in class, some of them we've not. If you don't know, that's okay. They just want to know how many students like know all the answers to these things. How many answers know some of the answers to these things. If we do more of these, we'll do another survey like this at the end where they see like how kind of our opinions change. So far, based on what we did today, what do you guys think? If you're in the chat, say like something like, I liked it or I didn't like it. If you're in person, thumbs up, thumbs down. What did you think so far about this? Thumbs up, 3 thumbs up. Looking for 7, 8 more thumbs. Thumbs up or thumbs down? For today, what we did in this reading. The reading and discussion, was it a good experience? Was it like, let's stick, like maybe do some more of this, or thumbs down, like not do any more of this? Okay. Sabian, 1 thumbs down. All right, cool. All right, so right now then, last couple minutes, be working on those 2 surveys if you have not finished one or both.